Jay Jones's text messages are less important than blank for the Virginia elections.
Before we give our answers, let's give a little bit of backstory about, one, who Jay Jones is, because you probably might not know at home. He is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in Virginia. You learn something new every day. And over the weekend, a pretty significant scandal broke about bad text messages he sent to other state representatives just after he left the State House in 2022, where he essentially said he wanted to assassinate then State House leader Gilbert, who is a Republican. And these are bad, and especially in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, you know, talks of violence in political discourse have been a hot topic issue. But let's look at what he actually said. He said, if there are three people in a room, Gilbert, Hitler, and I actually forgot who the third one was. Pol Pot. I'm reserving 2 bullets to put in Gilbert's head. Not really much wiggle room there.
And wish for the death of his children, who I wanted to double check because I'm like, maybe they're like adult children who are also in politics. Nope, school-age children.
Yeah.
So that's...
It's gross. It's not good. It's kind of exactly what we, the two of us, want to get away from as we are discussing politics as an entire country. But I'm going to be honest, I don't really think this is going to influence the race at all. And I can tell you why. Virginia. State, heard of it, it's pretty close. A lot of federal workers there, a lot of federal workers who have already been laid off and who might, that number might increase as the president pursues these government shutdown layoffs. Unemployment in Virginia this year is up some 30% compared to 2024. The near entirety of that is due to these federal workers being axed by the Trump administration.
And that's probably an underestimate because of the shutdown.
Yeah,
because
that's
the
correct.
BLS is not giving us the actual unemployment rate by state.
And quite literally, we talk about this all the time. During the Glenn Youngkin, Virginia race, like sure, school issues, were at the forefront of voters' minds. But everything comes back to the economy. And when economic sentiment is poor and the outlook for next year is even worse, and you've lost your job, I don't see a lot of loyalty among these Republicans in the federal workforce or who were in the federal workforce and going forward and voting for the guys who just upended their entire family life. I just don't see that happening. And I do think, like we talked about at the top and above the fold, this is a problem solely created by the Trump administration, and Republicans are going to pay the penalty next November.
So Christian, like you, I'm really cynical about these text messages. I find them horrific. If I were in charge of a political party, this would be probably one of the easiest things to make me say, you need to drop out. Not only do we disavow your campaign, you're done in politics. Unfortunately, not one Democrat from Virginia agrees. Abigail Spanberger is, after, a little bit, the texts were bad. That's why you need to vote for us and Jay Jones, which is kind of bull, if you ask me. And also just the polling on political violence, it hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. We have this poll from the Skeptic Research Foundation that shows 44% of voters that identify as very liberal say violence is often necessary to create social change. Also, half of all Gen Z liberals. It's very scary when you look down by age. So I think the era of not wishing violence on your political opponents is unfortunately waning. Not, it's not a problem that's getting better. Which is why I think if there's one silver lining for Republicans in Virginia, because they are facing the headwinds of DOGE and the federal layoffs, also the fact that unlike 2021, Joe Biden is not in office, Trump is. So the incumbent party in power, they get correctly more credit for what's going on that's good and blame for what's going on that's bad. I would say if there's anything that can save Virginia, Republicans, that I certainly think will matter more to closing the margin at minimum than these Jay Jones text messages. It's the exact same stuff that helped Glenn Youngkin in 2021. The schools and the transanity. By the transanity, I do not mean transgender people in Virginia or transgender adults identifying as such or using pronouns or in private places being allowed to use a bathroom. I'm talking about taxpayer-funded spaces and specifically schools. Back in 2021, there was one massive scandal, and that was the Loudoun County bathroom rape scandal. It was one scandal. It was horrific. The girl in question this was a high school girl who was raped in a girl's bathroom by a boy wearing a skirt. It was a pretty disgusting scandal, and just like the fact that it was so new as a concept really helped push Glenn Youngkin over the finish line. Mm-hmm. Now we have about like 7 or 8 of these different scandals, right? So we have in Loudoun County a group of boys who were penalized for saying they didn't want to share the boys' changing room with a biological girl that identifies as trans. Loudoun County policy, they're fighting to keep gender identity the basis for intimate facilities, including underage changing rooms. Fairfax County, this is the big one, and it's one that we at the Examiner have been covering a lot just because it's so local to us. Fairfax County refuses to charge Richard Cox, who is a person that identifies as transgender, a registered sex offender of, I think he was originally convicted before I was born. He was keeping child porn on his phone next to the schedules of girls' swim practices in the rec centers in the regions. Would go to the Fairfax County publicly funded rec centers and expose himself to underage minor girls. Okay, so here's my question, Christian. As a liberal who I think if, Sarah McBride came in here, I think you and I would both be fine calling her Sarah and using Miss, whatever. Is this a woman or a man?
That's a criminal who is a man, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's easy. And if any other Democrat could say, we will respect people's personal choices among adults in private life, but for all intents and purposes, when we see a man, this is not allowed in a publicly funded locker room. I think one of the things that last week J.K. Rowling went viral for, a big tweet thread she did because it's part of her feud with Emma Watson over the trans issues thing. But the major point that J.K. Rowling made was that I think it's easy for us to forget, is that the trans stuff, the spaces that we really fight for are the ones that need to be accessible to the least privileged women in society. Things like taxpayer publicly funded rec centers, where homeless women use the showers. Literally, that is where taxpayers spend money for homeless women, and especially homeless moms, to use showers and have shelter. Public schools. If you're rich, you can always send your kids to private school if you don't want them to have to share a changing room with a man. Rape shelters, prisons, all of that. And that's why this matters. Is this the most important issue in the polling according to Virginians? No. The economy is still always number one. That is true. Is this an issue that I want to care about? Also no. I'm pretty squishy on a lot of the social stuff. I really don't want to care. I do not want to have to care about your personal life. But the second you go into a space that I pay for as a Virginia taxpayer and you endanger children, that's when we have to care. And I think that, this is not the same as 2021 because you don't have Biden inflation. You don't have, wokeness necessarily as a whole into overdrive. Mm-hmm. But Democrats still cannot say, this is a man and this is a criminal. And we need to develop a policy to make sure this never happens again. And so long as that is the case, I actually think especially Jason Miyares has a chance over Jay Jones.
You know what's kind of amazing about your answer? I agree with most of it. I'm not going to say I agreed with all of it. We've been talking about this question for 5 minutes now. And we've already forgot it's about Jay Jones's text messages.
Yeah,
so there's no way this is going to impact the results next November. But hey, we've been wrong before.